The money tin sat empty on the wooden table, and Penelope Zimmerman stared at it with hollow eyes while her 3-month-old daughter whimpered in the cradle her dead husband had built before the fever took him. She had sold everything except the clothes on her back, the baby's blanket, and the cradle itself, and still there was nothing left to keep them alive through another week in this unforgiving corner of Salida, Colorado in the spring of 1878. The advertisement in her trembling hand promised $50 to any woman willing to part with a healthy infant, and though the words blurred through her tears, Penelope had read them so many times she had memorized every cruel letter. $50 would get her to her sister in Kansas. $50 would mean food and shelter, and a chance to start over without the constant weight of another mouth to feed when her own stomach had been empty for 2 days straight. The baby deserved better than a mother who could barely stand from weakness, better than this drafty room above the abandoned mercantile where rats scratched in the walls at night. She had tried everything else first. The laundry work had dried up when Mrs. Henderson accused her of stealing a petticoat, a lie born from spite but believed nonetheless. The sewing she took in barely earned pennies, and her fingers bled from pushing the needle through heavy canvas. The restaurant owner had looked at her with pity, but said he could not hire a woman with a nursing baby, as if her daughter was some burden rather than the only light left in her darkening world. Even the church had turned her away when she asked for help, the new minister telling her that the Lord provided for those who worked hard, as if she had not worked until her hands cramped and her back screamed in protest. Penelope folded the advertisement and tucked it into her pocket, then lifted her daughter from the cradle. The baby had her father's dark hair and her mother's gray eyes, and when she looked up at Penelope with such innocent trust, the grief threatened to swallow her whole. Michael had been a good man, a carpenter with steady hands and a gentle smile, but the fever had come fast and vicious, taking him within 4 days of the first cough. He left behind debts she could not pay and a landlord who wanted her out by the end of the month. The sun was setting when Penelope wrapped her shawl around herself and the baby and descended the narrow stairs to the street. The address on the advertisement led to a house on the edge of town, a painted lady establishment where women sold different services than Penelope had ever considered. She walked quickly, keeping her head down, praying no one would see her and guess her terrible purpose. The madam who answered the door was younger than expected, perhaps 30, with rouge on her cheeks and a calculating look in her green eyes. She invited Penelope inside without ceremony, leading her to a parlor decorated in red velvet and dark wood. Another woman sat there, older and severe, dressed in expensive black silk that rustled when she stood. "This is Mrs. Caldwell," the madam said. "She is the one placing the advertisement." Mrs. Caldwell approached with quick steps, her gaze fixed on the baby in Penelope's arms. "How old?" 3 months. Penelope's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Healthy." "Yes, madam, never been sick a day, Mrs." Caldwell reached out to pull back the blanket, examining the baby with the same detachment one might show when purchasing livestock. Penelope felt something crack inside her chest, but she stood still and let the woman look. What choice did she have? The baby needed to eat. The baby needed warmth and safety, and a future that did not involve starving in a freezing room while her mother's milk dried up from malnutrition. "She will do," Mrs. Caldwell said finally. The advertisement stated $50. Penelope nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "However, I have changed my mind about the price," Mrs. Caldwell continued. $30 is more than fair for an infant of uncertain parentage." "Uncertain?" Penelope found her voice sharp with indignation. My husband was Michael Zimmerman, a respected carpenter in this town before he died. My daughter is legitimate and well-born. Your husband is dead and you are destitute, Mrs. Caldwell said flatly. $30. Take it or leave it. The madam shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Penelope looked down at her daughter, who had fallen asleep against her chest, tiny fingers curled against the worn fabric of her dress. $30 would not get her to Kansas. $30 would barely cover a month's rent and food, and then she would be right back where she started with nothing and no one. But what else could she do? I need time to think, Penelope heard herself say. Mrs. Caldwell's expression hardened. I leave for Denver on the morning train. Decide now, or I will find another child elsewhere. There are plenty of desperate women in this territory. The words hit like a slap, made worse because they were true. Penelope closed her eyes and tried to summon the will to hand over her daughter, to take the money and walk away, and somehow learn to live with the hole it would tear in her soul. The door to the parlor burst open before she could force herself to move. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with dust on his boots and a hat in his hands. He had dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of whiskey in sunlight, and his gaze swept the room before landing on Penelope with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Excuse me, ladies," he said, his voice a low rumble edged with something dangerous. "I could not help but overhear through the door, and I got to say, I take issue with what is happening here." The madam stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson, this is not your concern. This is a private matter." "That's so." The man, Mr. Lawson, moved further into the room, and Penelope noticed the gun belt at his hip, the easy confidence of someone who knew how to handle himself. "Because from where I was standing, it sounded like this woman is being forced to sell her baby because she has got nothing left, and that sits wrong with me." "No one is forcing anything," Mrs. Caldwell snapped. "She came here of her own free will. Did she now?" Mr. Lawson looked at Penelope, really looked at her, and she felt stripped bare under that gaze, every fear and shame and desperate hope laid out for him to see. "Madam, is this what you want, truly?" Penelope opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Tears spilled down her cheeks instead, hot and shameful, and she shook her head because she could not lie, not even to save her pride. "There you have it," Mr. Lawson said quietly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather purse, counting out bills with quick efficiency. "How much does she owe? Rent, debts, whatever is crushing her down so hard she would consider this." "That is none of your business," Mrs. Caldwell said. "I am making it my business." He turned back to Penelope. "How much, madam?" Penelope swallowed hard. $40 for back rent. "Another 15 for debts my husband left. But I cannot take your money. I do not even know you." "Name's Tobias Lawson," he said simply. "And you do not need to know me to let me help. No woman should have to sell her child, not while I am still standing and able to do something about it." The words settled over the room like a physical weight. Mrs. Caldwell made a disgusted noise and snatched up her gloves from the side table. "This is absurd. I do not have time for dramatics. Good evening to you all." She swept out in a rustle of silk, leaving Penelope standing in the middle of the parlor with her sleeping baby and this stranger who had just upended everything with a few words and a handful of money. The madam cleared her throat. "Mr. Lawson, perhaps you and the lady would like to continue this conversation somewhere more appropriate. The silver dollar serves a decent supper." Tobias nodded his thanks and gestured toward the door. Penelope followed on unsteady legs, her mind reeling. Nothing made sense. Men did not simply appear out of nowhere and offer to solve all your problems without wanting something in return. She had lived long enough to know that kindness always came with a price. The evening air was cool against her flushed cheeks as they walked down the street. Tobias kept a respectful distance, his long strides shortened to match her pace. The Silver Dollar was a modest establishment, cleaner than most saloons, with a dining room separate from the bar where decent women could eat without harassment. They sat at a corner table, and Tobias ordered stew and bread for them both without asking what she wanted. Penelope should have been offended by the presumption, but her stomach growled loudly enough that the baby stirred against her chest, and she was too hungry to care about pride. "Tell me your situation," Tobias said once the waitress had left. "All of it." So Penelope did. The words tumbled out between bites of the best food she had tasted in weeks. She told him about Michael and the fever, about the debts and the lost work and the landlord's threats. She told him about the empty money tin, and the advertisement, and the terrible weight of watching her daughter slowly weaken from hunger, because her own milk was not enough anymore. Tobias listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as the story unfolded. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. "I got a proposition for you," he said finally. "And before you think the worst, let me lay it out plain. I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles north of here. Good land, decent house, but I have been working it alone since my partner died last winter. I need help. Cooking, cleaning, mending, all the things I have been doing poorly while trying to keep the ranch running. You need money and a safe place for you and your daughter." "Seems to me we could help each other out." Penelope stared at him. "You want to hire me, room and board plus wages, enough to save up a nest egg so you are never in this position again." He leaned forward, his gaze steady and sincere. "I am not asking anything improper. You would have your own room, your own space. I work hard and I sleep heavy, and I got no interest in making your life more difficult than it already is. Why would you do this for a stranger?" Tobias was quiet again, and something painful flickered across his face before he schooled it back to neutral. "Had a sister once. She got herself in a bad situation, and nobody helped her when she needed it most. She died bringing a baby into the world, and the baby died with her. I swore after that I would not stand by if I ever saw another woman in desperate straits. So here we are." The simple honesty of it made Penelope's chest tight. She looked down at her daughter, who was awake now and watching the lantern light with wide, fascinated eyes. Every instinct screamed that this was too good to be true, that there had to be a catch, but what other options did she have? Go back to that freezing room and wait to starve? Try to find Mrs. Caldwell and accept her insulting offer? When would I start? She asked quietly. Relief softened Tobias's stern features. "Tomorrow, if you are willing. I will pay your debts tonight and arrange for your things to be brought to the ranch. You can spend tonight at the boarding house, my treat, and I will collect you first thing in the morning." Penelope nodded slowly. "All right, but I will work hard, Mr. Lawson. I will earn every penny you spend on me." "I do not doubt it for a second, madam." He stood and offered his hand. "And you can call me Tobias." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard labor, the strength carefully tempered so as not to hurt her. Penelope Zimmerman." "Well, Mrs. Zimmerman, let us get you settled for the night." True to his word, Tobias paid for a room at the boarding house and gave her enough money for breakfast in the morning. He also pressed an extra $5 into her hand when she protested, telling her to buy anything she or the baby needed. Then he tipped his hat and disappeared into the night, leaving Penelope standing in a clean room with a real bed and wondering if she had dreamed the entire evening. The baby fussed, hungry again, and Penelope sat in the rocking chair by the window to nurse her. The street below was quiet now, just a few cowboys making their way to the saloons, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. She thought about Michael and how he would have liked Tobias, would have appreciated the straightforward honesty and the willingness to help. She thought about how close she had come to doing something irreversible, and the knowledge made her shake with delayed terror. "We are going to be all right," she whispered to her daughter. "We are going to survive this." The baby's only response was to nurse more vigorously, her small hand resting trustingly against Penelope's chest. Morning came too quickly and too slowly all at once. Penelope had barely slept, her mind churning through every possible way this arrangement could go wrong. But when Tobias arrived with a wagon just after dawn, he was exactly as he had been the night before. Steady, calm, respectful. He loaded her few possessions without comment, then helped her onto the wagon seat with the careful courtesy her father had shown her mother. The ride north took them through rolling hills greening with spring grass. Wildflowers dotted the landscape, and a hawk circled overhead against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The baby slept in Penelope's arms, lulled by the wagon's gentle rocking, and Tobias drove in comfortable silence. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a line of fence posts, then as grazing cattle scattered across the valley, and finally as a sturdy house built of timber and stone with a wide porch and glass windows that caught the morning sun. Outbuildings dotted the property, a barn and a stable and what looked like a smokehouse, all well maintained despite Tobias's claim of working alone. "It is beautiful," Penelope said, and meant it. Tobias looked pleased. "Built it with my partner, John. He was a good man. Fell through the ice on the creek last December trying to rescue a calf. By the time I got to him, the cold had already taken hold. He lasted 2 days before the fever set in. I am sorry for your loss. Seems we have both lost people we cared about." Tobias pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "Makes us understand each other a bit better, I think." He showed her inside, and Penelope tried not to let her surprise show. The house was cleaner than she expected, though clearly lacking a woman's touch. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with chairs, and shelves lined with books. A kitchen area took up one corner, well stocked and organized. 2 doors led off the main room, and Tobias opened one to reveal a bedroom with a real bed, a dresser, and a cradle that looked brand new. "Made that last night," Tobias said, nodding toward the cradle. "Figured the little one needed a proper place to sleep." Penelope ran her fingers over the smooth wood, the careful joints, the rockers that moved silently on the floor. He had carved a simple pattern of flowers along the headboard, nothing fancy but clearly done with care. "Thank you," she managed, her throat tight. "My room is through there." Tobias pointed to the other door. "And there is a lock on your door if it makes you feel safer." "I rise before dawn most days and work until dark. Breakfast around 5, dinner around 7 if that suits you. I am not particular about food, and I have been getting by on beans and bacon, so anything you make will be an improvement." Over the following days, they settled into a routine. Penelope rose early to cook breakfast, then spent the day cleaning and mending while the baby napped. Tobias worked the ranch, coming in for meals dusty and tired but always with a kind word and a gentle hand when he played with the baby. He had a way with her, could make her smile with funny faces and calm her fussing with a low, rumbling song about cattle drives and starry nights. Penelope found herself watching him more than she should. The way he moved with unconscious grace, the strength in his hands when he carried in firewood, the laugh lines around his eyes when something amused him. He was younger than she had first thought, maybe 26 to her 22, and handsome in a rough, unpolished way that made her heart skip when he smiled at her over the dinner table. She pushed those thoughts away as soon as they surfaced. She was a widow, Barely 3 months past her husband's death, and Tobias was her employer. Nothing more. He had made it clear this was a business arrangement, and she would not complicate it with foolish romantic notions born from gratitude and proximity. But as the weeks passed, she noticed small things that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, Tobias was not as unaffected as he pretended. The way his gaze lingered on her when he thought she was not looking. The wildflowers that appeared in a jar on the kitchen table, placed there without comment or explanation. The night she came down with a fever and he sat by her bedside for hours, keeping watch over her and the baby both, his face drawn with worry. Spring turned to early summer, and the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Penelope's cooking had Tobias gaining back weight he had lost over the hard winter, and her careful management of the household made everything run smoother. She planted a garden behind the house, vegetables and herbs that would see them through the coming winter, and Tobias built her a fence to keep the deer out. They talked in the evenings after the work was done, sitting on the porch while the baby played on a blanket at their feet. Tobias told her about growing up in Texas, about following the cattle north and falling in love with Colorado's mountains. She told him about her childhood in Ohio, her family lost to cholera, her marriage to Michael, and the brief happiness they had shared before the fever took him. "Do you miss him?" Tobias asked one night, his voice careful. Penelope considered the question honestly. "I miss who he was, the life we had planned, but I am not sure I miss him the way a wife should miss a husband. We were friends more than anything, and the marriage was practical as much as romantic. Is that terrible to admit? Not terrible, just honest." Tobias leaned back in his chair, his gaze on the stars beginning to appear overhead. "I think a lot of marriages out here are built on practicality. Does not make them any less valid. Were you ever married?" "No. Came close once, but she decided she wanted city life more than ranch life. Cannot say I blame her. This is hard country and it takes a special kind of woman to thrive out here." Penelope looked out at the valley, at the way the setting sun painted everything gold and purple, at the mountains rising in the distance like sentinels. "I think I might be that kind of woman. I never knew it until now, but I feel more at home here than I ever did in town." Tobias turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. "I am glad to hear that. Real glad." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things, until the baby fussed and broke the spell. Penelope picked up her daughter, now 5 months old and growing fast, and excused herself to put her to bed. That night, lying in her room with moonlight streaming through the window, Penelope admitted to herself what she had been trying to deny for weeks. She was falling in love with Tobias Lawson. Not the desperate, grasping love of someone who needed saving, but the deep, steady love of a woman who had found a true partner. He made her laugh with his dry humor, impressed her with his work ethic, touched her heart with his gentleness toward her daughter. And unless she was completely misreading the signs, he felt something for her too. But what could she do about it? She was his employee, living under his roof on his charity. If she said something and he did not feel the same, she would lose everything she had rebuilt. The risk seemed too great, so she kept her feelings locked away and tried to be content with what she had. Then one afternoon in late June, everything changed. Penelope was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching fast. She looked up to see 3 men riding hard toward the house, and her stomach dropped when she recognized the lead rider. Luther Greaves, a rancher from the other side of the valley, known for his mean temper and his tendency to solve disputes with his fists. She grabbed the baby from her blanket and hurried into the house, locking the door behind her. Through the window, she watched the men dismount and pound on the door. "Lawson," Greaves shouted. "Get out here." Tobias emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression carefully neutral. "What can I do for you, Greaves? You got cattle on my land. I want them gone, and I want payment for the grass they ate. I have been keeping my herd on my side of the creek," Tobias said evenly. "If some wandered over, I will collect them, but I am not paying for honest mistakes." "Honest?" Greaves spat in the dirt. "There is nothing honest about you, Lawson. You think you can play the big man, taking in strays and running your mouth about what is right and wrong. Well, I got news for you. Some of us do not appreciate your interference." Penelope's blood ran cold. This was about her. About Tobias stopping her from selling the baby. Somehow word had gotten out, and men like Greaves, men who saw women and children as property, had taken offense. "I do not know what you are talking about," Tobias said, but his hand had moved closer to his gun. "That woman in your house. Everyone knows you paid her debts and set her up here. Makes folks wonder what kind of arrangement you really got going on." Tobias's expression went hard as stone. "Mrs. Zimmerman is my employee, and her reputation is beyond reproach. You are going to apologize for that insinuation right now." Greaves laughed, an ugly sound. "I will do no such thing, but I will give you a choice. Run her off and we will forget this whole thing. Keep her here and you will find yourself with more trouble than you can handle." "Is that a threat?" "It is a promise." Tobias took a step forward, and Penelope saw the anger radiating off him like heat. "Luther, you rode all the way out here to threaten me over a woman and her baby. Over my decision to help someone in need. That is the sorriest excuse for neighborly behavior I have ever heard. You watch your tone with me, boy. Or what? You will try to run me off my own land." Tobias shook his head. "I have dealt with worse than you, and I am still standing. Now get off my property before I lose my patience." One of Greaves's men moved his hand toward his gun, and everything happened fast. Tobias drew and fired, shooting the gun out of the man's hand before anyone else could blink. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the valley, and the wounded man yelped, clutching his bleeding fingers. "Anyone else?" Tobias asked quietly, his gun still drawn. Greaves's face had gone purple with rage, but he was not stupid enough to draw on a man who had just proven his speed. "This is not over, Lawson." "Yes, it is. Now ride out." The three men mounted and left at a gallop, leaving dust and threats hanging in the air. Tobias stood watching until they disappeared over the ridge, then holstered his gun and turned toward the house. Penelope opened the door before he could knock. "Are you all right?" "Fine." "Are you?" "Shaken, but fine." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the controlled fury still simmering beneath the surface. "You should not have defended me like that. You have made an enemy now." "I have made enemies before. They do not worry me much." Tobias stepped inside and closed the door. "But we need to talk about this, about what people are saying." Penelope set the baby in her cradle and turned to face him, her hands clasped tight to hide their trembling. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door. If you want me to leave, stop." Tobias crossed the room in 3 long strides, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes. "I do not want you to leave. I have never wanted that. But I need to know something, and I need you to be honest with me." "What? Do you feel anything for me beyond gratitude?" "Because I have been fighting my feelings for weeks now, telling myself it would not be right to push you when you are still grieving your husband and depending on me for survival. But after what just happened, after Greaves made it clear the whole valley thinks we are more than employer and employee anyway, I figure I might as well lay my cards on the table. I have fallen in love with you, Penelope, with you and your daughter both. And if there is even a chance you might feel the same, I would like to know." Penelope's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You love me, with everything I have. But I am broken," she whispered. A widow with nothing, with a baby and debts and a past full of mistakes. You are strong and kind and braver than anyone I have ever met. You were willing to tear your heart out to save your daughter, and you have built a home here from nothing but determination and grace. I do not see broken when I look at you. I see everything I have ever wanted and been too scared to hope for. The tears came then, hot and relieved and full of emotions too big to contain. I love you too. I have been so scared to say it, so scared to lose what we have, but I love you, Tobias. You saved me when I had nothing left, and you have given me a reason to hope again. Tobias cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. Can I kiss you, please? He kissed her like she was precious, like she might break, and Penelope kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past months. His arms came around her, strong and safe, and she let herself lean into his strength without fear of being thought weak. This was not like her marriage to Michael, based on practicality and mild affection. This was fire and connection, and the bone-deep certainty of finding the right person at the right time. When they finally pulled apart, Tobias rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. Not because you need protection or security, but because you want to. Because you love me and I love you, and we can build something real together. Yes, Penelope said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with only the minister and his wife as witnesses. Greaves had spread his poison through the valley, and several of the neighboring ranchers had made it clear they disapproved of Tobias's choices. But there were others who came by in the days before the wedding, bringing gifts and well wishes, good people who respected Tobias and were willing to give Penelope a chance. The night of their wedding, after the minister had left and the baby was asleep in her cradle, Tobias carried Penelope over the threshold of what was now their shared bedroom. He made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, showing her with touch and whispered words how deeply he cherished her. It was nothing like the fumbling attempts with Michael, nothing like the duty she had sometimes felt. This was joy and passion in coming home. Afterward, lying tangled together in the moonlight, Tobias traced lazy patterns on her shoulder and asked, "What do you want to name her?" Penelope blinked in confusion. "Who? Your daughter. I never heard you call her anything but sweetheart or darling." "I could not decide," Penelope admitted. Michael wanted to name her Rebecca after his mother, but she died before he could meet her. It felt wrong to use the name he chose. "What about Hope?" Tobias suggested. "Because that is what she represents to me, the hope that brought you into my life." Penelope tested the name silently, then smiled. "Hope Lawson, I like it." "Hope Lawson," Tobias repeated, sounding pleased. "Our daughter." The casual way he claimed Hope as his own made Penelope's heart swell. She turned to kiss him again, pouring everything she felt into the connection, and they made love again as husband and wife, sealing their vows in the most intimate way possible. Summer deepened into autumn, and the ranch prospered. Tobias hired 2 young cowboys to help with the work, which gave him more time to spend with Penelope and Hope. They were good men, respectful and hardworking, and they seemed genuinely happy for Tobias's newfound family. Greaves continued to cause trouble when he could, spreading rumors and occasionally running cattle across Tobias's land in the night. But Tobias handled each incident with calm determination, refusing to be baited into anything that might escalate the situation. He had too much to lose now, he told Penelope. A wife and daughter worth more than any amount of pride or revenge, Penelope thrived in her new role as Tobias's wife. She expanded the garden, put up preserves for winter, and made the house truly feel like a home with curtains and rugs and small touches of beauty. She also discovered she had a knack for working with the horses, and Tobias taught her to ride so she could accompany him around the ranch. Those rides became her favorite part of the day. Just the two of them on horseback, Hope strapped to Penelope's chest in a sling, riding through the valley while Tobias pointed out landmarks and shared stories. He told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to build it into something their children could inherit. Children, plural. The idea made Penelope glow with happiness. Their first real test came in November when an early blizzard swept down from the mountains. Tobias and the cowboys worked around the clock to bring the cattle in close and make sure they had shelter and food. Penelope kept the house warm and the meals coming, and when one of the young cowboys came down with frostbite, she nursed him through it with the same care she would have shown family. The storm lasted 3 days, and when it finally cleared, they had lost only a handful of cattle. Other ranchers had not been so lucky, and even Greaves grudgingly admitted that Tobias knew his business. Christmas came, and Tobias gave Penelope a beautiful shawl he had ridden 2 days to Denver to buy. She gave him a new set of leather work gloves she had made herself, sewn with careful stitches during Hope's nap times. They spent the day quietly together, just the 3 of them, and Penelope marveled at how different this Christmas was from the last one, when Michael had still been alive but already showing signs of the illness that would kill him. She felt guilty sometimes for how happy she was, for how thoroughly Tobias had claimed her heart in a way Michael never had. But when she confessed this to Tobias one night, he kissed her temple and said, "Love is not a limited resource. You can honor what you had with Michael and still build something new with me. There is no shame in choosing happiness." Winter tested them but did not break them. Spring returned with mud and renewal, and Penelope discovered she was pregnant in late April. Tobias's joy was so pure and unrestrained that it made her laugh and cry at the same time. He spent the next weeks building a second cradle and fretting over her health until she had to physically push him out the door to go work. Hope was walking now, a determined toddler who followed her father everywhere and called him Papa with perfect confidence. Tobias doted on her shamelessly, carving her toys and teaching her to identify animals and flowers. Watching them together made Penelope's heart ache with love. The baby was born in January of 1880, a healthy boy with Tobias's dark hair and Penelope's gray eyes. They named him John, after Tobias's late partner, and Tobias cried when he held his son for the first time. "I never thought I would have this," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "A family, a home, someone to pass the ranch to." Penelope, exhausted but happy, reached up to touch his face. "You gave me a future when I had none. Let me give you this." Little John was an easy baby, content to sleep and eat and watch the world with curious eyes. Hope was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to help with everything and singing him the same songs Tobias had once sung to her. They were a family in every sense of the word, bound not just by law or necessity, but by genuine love and respect. That spring, Greaves rode out one final time. But instead of threats, he came with an offer. His wife had finally convinced him to give up the feud, and he wanted to propose a truce. The valley would be better for all of them if they could work together instead of against each other. Tobias considered the offer carefully, then agreed on the condition that Greaves publicly apologize to Penelope for the things he had said about her character. To everyone's surprise, Greaves did so, standing in the middle of the general store in Salida, and stating clearly that he had been wrong to spread rumors about Mrs. Lawson, who was a respectable woman and good wife. It was not a perfect apology, but it was enough. The tension that had hung over the valley for months finally eased, and neighboring ranchers began to interact with the easy camaraderie that made frontier life bearable. Years passed in a rhythm of work and love and growing. Hope grew into a bright, confident girl who could ride as well as any cowboy. John followed in his father's footsteps, showing an early aptitude for working with animals. Penelope and Tobias added 2 more children to their family, a daughter they named Grace, and another son they named Michael, honoring Penelope's first husband without letting his memory overshadow their present. The ranch expanded slowly but steadily. Tobias bought out a neighbor who wanted to move east, doubling their land holdings. He hired more help and built a bunkhouse for the cowboys, then a second barn for the growing horse herd. Penelope started raising chickens and sold eggs in town, her small enterprise growing into a tidy profit that she saved for the children's education. They had hard times too. A drought one summer that made water scarce and tempers short. A winter so brutal they lost half the herd and had to rebuild from almost nothing. The year Grace nearly died from scarlet fever, and Penelope spent weeks nursing her back to health, while Tobias held everything else together through sheer force of will. But they weathered every storm together, their love deepening with each challenge overcome. Tobias never let Penelope forget that she was cherished, bringing her wildflowers and stolen kisses and whispered words of love. Penelope made sure Tobias knew he was appreciated, creating a home that was warm and welcoming, a sanctuary from the harsh world outside. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Tobias took Penelope riding to the spot where he had first told her he loved her. The valley spread out below them, golden in the summer sun, dotted with their cattle and marked by the buildings they had built together. "You remember that night in town?" Tobias asked, his arm around her waist. "When you were going to sell hope because you had nothing?" "I remember," Penelope said softly. "I remember thinking I was completely alone in the world, and I said not while I was still standing." Tobias turned her to face him, his eyes warm with emotion. "I meant it then, and I mean it now. As long as I am breathing, you will never be alone again. You and our children are my whole world." "You saved me," Penelope said, touching his face. "In every way a person can be saved. I was drowning and you threw me a rope." "No," Tobias corrected gently. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a chance to do it. Everything else, building this life and this family, that was all you. Your strength, your courage, your love." Penelope kissed him as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Below them, the house they had built together stood solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where their children were probably helping the housekeeper prepare dinner. Their cattle grazed peacefully, the horses ran in the pasture, and everything they could see belonged to them, earned through hard work and devotion. "I love you," Penelope said against his lips, "more than I have words to express." "I love you too," Tobias replied. "More than all the stars in the sky." They rode back as twilight fell, hand in hand, their horses walking side by side down the familiar trail. The house came into view, windows glowing with lamplight, and Hope stood on the porch waving at them while little Michael toddled around her feet. John was probably in the barn doing his evening chores, and Grace would be helping set the table, everything running smoothly in the way that came from years of routine and love. This was home. Not just a place, but a feeling, a collection of moments and memories and people who mattered more than anything. Penelope thought about the desperate woman she had been, standing in that parlor with her baby and preparing to do the unthinkable. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from another lifetime. She had been so certain she had nothing left. But the truth was she had possessed everything she needed all along. The courage to keep fighting, the love for her daughter that gave her purpose, the strength to accept help when it was offered. Tobias had not saved her from poverty and desperation. He had given her the space and support to save herself, to become the woman she was always meant to be. And in return, she had given him a family, a home filled with laughter and love, a legacy that would outlast them both. It was more than fair. It was everything. They dismounted in the barn, and Tobias kissed her once more before they went inside to their children. A simple kiss, the kind shared by couples who had weathered years together and knew there would be many more to come. Then they walked into the house holding hands, greeted by the chaos and joy of 4 children all talking at once, competing for attention and affection. Penelope helped serve dinner while Tobias washed up, and they all sat around the table they had built together in this house they had made a home. Grace said the blessing, her sweet voice thanking God for family and food and safety. John immediately started talking about a new calf born that morning. Hope wanted to know if she could ride into town tomorrow to visit her friend. Michael was more interested in stealing bites of bread than listening to anything anyone said. It was ordinary. Perfectly, wonderfully ordinary. The kind of evening Penelope had once thought she would never have again. After dinner, after the children were bathed and tucked into bed, after the house had quieted and the day's work was finally done, Penelope and Tobias sat on the porch in the cool evening air. The stars were coming out overhead, brilliant against the black sky, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. "Tell me again," Penelope said, leaning her head on Tobias's shoulder. "Tell you what, the night we met. What you were thinking when you walked into that parlor." Tobias was quiet for a moment, his hand finding hers and lacing their fingers together. "I was coming back from a supply run, stopped at the saloon for a drink. Heard the madam talking to one of the other women about a situation happening upstairs. A young widow selling her baby. I knew I should not get involved, knew it was none of my business. But I kept thinking about my sister, about how different things might have been if someone had stepped in to help her. So I went upstairs and pushed my way into that room, and there you were." "I must have looked terrible," Penelope said. "Half-starved and desperate. You looked like someone fighting with everything she had left," Tobias corrected. "You looked like someone worth saving. And when you started crying and shook your head, when you showed me that you did not really want to do it, that you just could not see any other way out, I knew I had to do something. So I said what came to my heart, not while I was still standing, because I meant it, Penelope. As long as I had breath in my body and the ability to help, I was not going to let you go through with that." Penelope turned to kiss him, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. "Best decision you ever made. Best decision we both made," Tobias said. "You could have refused my help. Could have been too proud or too scared to take the chance. But you trusted me, and that trust made all the difference." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the sounds of their ranch settling in for the night. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. Closer, the horses shifted in their stalls. Inside the house, one of the children cried out briefly from a dream, then quieted again. These were the sounds of home. The sounds of a life built from nothing but determination and love and the willingness to take a chance on hope. "What are you thinking?" Tobias asked after a while. "That I am happy," Penelope said simply. "Truly, deeply happy in a way I never thought possible. You gave me that, Tobias. You and this life we have built together. We gave it to each other," Tobias said. "That is what marriage is supposed to be. Not one person saving the other, but 2 people choosing every day to build something together." Penelope nodded against his shoulder, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. They had both brought their scars and sorrows to this relationship. Tobias with his grief over his sister and his late partner, Penelope with her first husband's death and the desperate poverty that followed. But instead of letting those wounds define them, they had chosen to heal together, to create something new and beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. The door creaked open and Hope appeared, rubbing her eyes. "Mama, I had a bad dream." "Come here, sweetheart," Penelope said, opening her arms. Hope climbed into her mother's lap and Tobias adjusted to make room, wrapping his arm around both of them. "What was the dream about?" Tobias asked gently. "I could not find you," Hope said, her voice small. "I was looking and looking, but you were both gone." "We are right here," Penelope soothed, stroking her daughter's dark hair. "We will always be right here." "Promise, promise," Tobias said firmly. "Your mama and I are not going anywhere. You are stuck with us." Hope giggled at that, the sound breaking the last of the dream's hold. She snuggled deeper into Penelope's embrace, her breathing evening out as sleep reclaimed her. They sat like that for a long time, the three of them together under the stars. Eventually Tobias carried Hope back to her bed, tucking her in beside Grace, who had not stirred through the whole episode. Then he and Penelope retired to their own room, the space that had become their sanctuary. Tobias helped Penelope with the buttons on her dress, his fingers deft and familiar. She turned in his arms when she was down to her chemise, sliding her hands up his chest to loop around his neck. "Make love to me," she whispered. "Always," Tobias replied, lifting her and carrying her to their bed. They came together with the ease of long practice and deep love, bodies that knew each other intimately and hearts that beat in sync. Afterward, Penelope lay with her head on Tobias's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow as sleep claimed him. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The grief and fear, the moment of desperation when she had truly believed selling her baby was the only option, the miracle of Tobias walking through that door and offering another way. If someone had told her that night that in 2 years she would be lying in bed beside a man she loved more than life itself, in a house they owned together, with 4 healthy children sleeping down the hall, she would have thought them mad. But here she was, living proof that even the darkest moments could lead to light, that desperation could transform into hope, that love could be found in the most unexpected places. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness, though Tobias was already asleep. "Thank you for standing when I needed someone to lean on. Thank you for loving me and Hope and giving us a family. Thank you for every day we have together." Sleep came easy, dreamless and deep, the sleep of someone who had found their place in the world and knew beyond doubt that they were exactly where they belonged. Morning brought the usual rush of activity. Children to feed, chores to assign, a day's work stretching out before them. But Penelope moved through it all with a lightness in her step, aware of how blessed she was. Every mundane task was a gift. Every moment with her family was precious. Tobias caught her hand as she passed him in the kitchen, pulling her in for a quick kiss that made the children groan and giggle. "I love you, Mrs. Lawson." "I love you too, Mr. Lawson," she replied, her smile bright enough to rival the sun streaming through the windows. The years continued to unfold, bringing changes and challenges and joys in equal measure. Hope grew into a beautiful young woman who could rope a calf and dance a waltz with equal skill. She eventually married one of the ranch hands, a good man who loved her fiercely and treated her parents with respect. Her wedding day was one of laughter and happy tears, and Tobias walked her down the makeshift aisle with pride shining in his eyes. John took over more and more of the ranch operations as Tobias's hair began to gray, showing the same intuitive understanding of the land and animals that his father possessed. He married a schoolteacher from town, a sharp woman who helped establish a school on the ranch, so the children in the valley did not have to ride so far for education. Grace became a talented artist, painting the landscapes she loved with skill that attracted buyers from as far away as Denver. She traveled some, seeing the wider world, but always came home to the ranch that had shaped her. Eventually, she married a banker from Salida who was smart enough to appreciate her free spirit and support her dreams. Little Michael, the baby Penelope had carried while building this life, grew into a gentle soul who preferred working with horses to cattle. He established a breeding program that brought quality horses to the whole region, earning respect and income that contributed to the family's continued prosperity. Through it all, Penelope and Tobias remained the steady center. They grew older together, their love deepening rather than fading with time. Tobias's hands developed arthritis that made the fine work harder, and Penelope's hair turned silver before she was 50. But they still stole kisses in the kitchen, still rode out together on summer evenings, still fell asleep tangled together in the bed they had shared for decades. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, the house filling with children and noise during holidays and celebrations. The ranch that Tobias had once worked alone became a thriving family enterprise, with multiple generations contributing to its success. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together people from all over the valley. Even Greaves came, old now and humbled by time, to offer his congratulations and admit that Tobias had been right about most things back in the day. Penelope stood beside her husband, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where she had once hung laundry with a baby on her hip and fear in her heart. The contrast was almost too much to bear. That desperate young widow and this confident matriarch felt like completely different people, though they shared the same soul. "What are you thinking?" Tobias asked, the same question he had been asking for 30 years. "That we did good," Penelope said, gesturing at the laughing children, the prosperous ranch, the family that had grown from just the two of them and hope. "We took our broken pieces and built something beautiful." "We did," Tobias agreed, pulling her close. "And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, they made us who we are." As the sun set on their anniversary celebration, painting the valley in familiar shades of gold and crimson, Penelope thought about that night in the parlor one final time. She thought about the advertisement folded in her pocket, the cruel offer from Mrs. Caldwell, the moment when everything had seemed lost. And then she thought about Tobias walking through that door, his eyes fierce with conviction, his voice steady as he spoke words that would change her life forever. "Not while I am still standing." He had kept that promise every day since. Through illness and injury, through drought and financial strain, through the normal struggles of building a life in wild country, he had stood beside her. And she had stood beside him, their partnership equal and true. "I love you," she told him, the words as fresh and genuine as the first time she had spoken them. "I love you too," Tobias replied, his voice roughened by age but still strong. "Until my last breath and beyond." Their children called them over to cut the anniversary cake, and they went together, hand in hand, surrounded by the love they had created and the legacy they would leave behind. The ranch would continue after them, passed down through generations who would know the story of how it all began. How a desperate woman and a cowboy with a good heart had found each other in the darkest moment and built something that would outlast them both. It was not a fairy tale. There had been too much pain and struggle and real, hard work for that. But it was a love story in the truest sense. Two people who had chosen each other, day after day, year after year, building a life of purpose and meaning and joy. And when Penelope lay down to sleep that night, her husband's arm around her waist and the sounds of her family settling in for the night around her, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice all those years ago. Taking Tobias's hand, trusting in his offer of help. Opening her heart to love again even when it felt impossible. The baby she had almost sold was a mother herself now, with children who would never know the poverty and desperation that had almost destroyed their grandmother's life. The cycle had been broken, the future secured. And all because one man had looked at a stranger's suffering and decided he could not walk away, not while he was still standing. Those words had become a motto for their family, a reminder that as long as they had strength and will, they could overcome anything. The children had grown up hearing the story, understanding the weight of it, learning the lesson that compassion and courage could change lives. Penelope drifted toward sleep with a smile on her face, grateful beyond measure for every day she had been given. The scared young woman she had been would have wept to see this future, to know that the darkness did not last forever, that hope could be found even in the deepest despair. "Sweet dreams," Tobias murmured, kissing her temple. "Always sweet when I am with you," Penelope replied, and it was true. Her dreams were full of golden valleys and wildflowers, of children's laughter in a house filled with love, of a man whose steady presence had been the rock she built her new life upon. And when she woke in the morning to another day in paradise, she knew she would live it with the same gratitude and joy that had carried her through all the years since that fateful night. The story of how she almost sold her baby because she had nothing, and the cowboy who said not while he was still standing, had become legend in the valley. People told it to their children, a tale of hope and redemption, and the power of choosing kindness in a world that often demanded hardness. But for Penelope and Tobias, it was not a legend. It was their life, their truth, the foundation of everything they had built together. And as the seasons turned and the years flowed like water, that foundation remained solid, a testament to what was possible when two people committed to building something greater than themselves. They grew old together on that ranch, watching their legacy flourish and expand. And when the time finally came for them to leave this world, they left it knowing they had lived fully and loved deeply, and made a difference that would echo through generations. But that ending was still far in the future on this night, their 30th anniversary, when they were still strong enough to dance and laugh and hold each other close. The house settled into quiet around them, the valley spread dark and peaceful beyond their windows, and two people who had found each other against all odds drifted into sleep wrapped in each other's arms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. The cattle would need tending, the children would need guidance, the ranch would require the constant work that had become as natural as breathing. But tonight was for rest and gratitude and the simple pleasure of being together. "Not while I am still standing," Tobias had said all those years ago, and he had kept that promise every single day. He stood beside Penelope through everything life threw at them, and she stood beside him with equal strength and devotion. Together they had built something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of love and family, and the stubborn refusal to give up even when all seemed lost. The moon rose over the valley, casting silver light across the land they loved. And in the house they had built with their own hands and hearts, two people slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had found their home in each other, and that nothing, not hardship or age or the passage of time, could ever take that away. This was their story. This was their life. And it was more beautiful than either of them had ever dared to dream.